Hello, everyone. Welcome to QuaranCon 2021. Sorry, trying to get the YouTube on my end so I can see the chat, but not hear myself read. That is very distracting. Sorry, my name is Jessa Forest. I write grimdark fantasy adventures, contemporary fantasy adventures. And today I'm going to be reading from my new book, sorry, my background, from Pulling Teeth, my short story collection set in the Slaughter Chronicles universe, which is about a young werewolf girl named Regina Slaughter, hence the Slaughter Chronicles. But today, the story excerpt that I'm going to be reading to you is called Demon Tooth, and it is actually a side story that features one of my favorite secondary characters, and I hope you enjoy it. So I will just start diving right in. I have a little epigraph here. So this is Demon Tooth. Go wisely and slowly. Those who rush, stumble, and fall. William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. Caleb Grimmett needed blood to draw the circle. Its circumference would be 18.84 feet exactly, with a 6-foot diameter. That meant at least 5 drops of blood per foot and at least twice as many drops, liberal spills really, of whiskey around the perimeter. To him, whiskey and blood sounded more like a cocktail recipe from a 1950s vampire frat party, but the math in his great-grandfather's book, hidden away from prying eyes in the attic all these years, didn't lie, or at least they hadn't so far. This was going to be the biggest thing he had ever done, bigger than setting the school on fire. Granted, it hadn't been a huge fire. The administration had conveniently blamed the accident on a gas leak. Whatever, he thought. He knew he'd done it. His friends knew he'd done it, and that was enough for him. He slid a folding knife from his back pocket and, with a quick flourish, cut his palm open, just like he'd seen in the movies. Pain shot up through his fingers and down his wrist. He whimpered and bit his lip. He shook his wounded hand to dissipate the pain and sent blood flying everywhere before he realized what he was doing. Determined not to waste any more of his precious body fluids, he walked around the edge of the circle. He squeezed and massaged the meat of his hand so that the blood dripped free and thick. The cut hurt, really hurt, more than he thought it would. The pain sent off alarm bells and dislodged something inside him. A scratchy, insidious root of doubt wormed around in his brain. Maybe this was all crazy. The symbols he'd carefully drawn might mean nothing. Crazy thoughts from a crazy old man. But then his eyes were drawn to the artifact again. It pulled at his senses, his very soul, and would not be denied. In the middle of the circle sat a tooth. It was large, larger than anything he or his friends had ever seen, the size of a small chest of drawers or a bedside table. It was cone-shaped with a jagged split down the middle that made it look more like a beak than a tooth. But that's what the journal said it was, and Caleb was not one to question the superior knowledge of his elders. Not without good reason, anyway. And if his great-grandfather said it was a tooth from the great demon lord, then the nicotine yellow cone thing was a tooth from the great demon lord. Once protective barrier number 1 was in place, he crossed to the deer head mounted above the entertainment system and untied the bandana that covered its glossy glass eyes. He clenched his fist and tried to tie a knot over his knuckles, allowing himself a moment of reverence as he pondered the actual size of a mouth that contained a whole multitude of those teeth. Fucking huge, he thought. The doorbell rang. Caleb flew up from the basement stairs and yanked open the front door. There they were, his comrades in arms. Jen with her heavy black eyeliner and overstuffed messenger bag bursting with composition notebooks full of shitty poetry and a legion of Sharpies. Jeff with the pizza and shitty lager tucked away in his backpack. And lovely Abigail, so insecure, so indecisive, so innocent in her puffy pink jacket, and so incredibly close to her father's out-of-town business friends that cocaine poured from her tiny pink Chanel bag like she was the Morton Salt girl. Jen pushed past him into the house and stomped down the basement, the sleeves of her oversized cradle of filth hoodie flapping behind her like black wings. Forgive her, Jeff clapped Caleb on the shoulder as he followed his sister. Sephora was out of blowjob lipstick today. We drove all the way to Little Rock for nothing. Alone in the doorway, Abigail ducked her head shyly. Hi, Caleb. You okay? Her eyes wandered over the damp bandana tied loosely around his throbbing hand. I'm much better now. Caleb grinned at her, his eyes memorizing her face. You brought the stuff, right? Sure did. She winked at him, a mischievous smirk on her matte pink lips. Then her face and neck flushed bright red, and she ducked her head again, hiding behind the chamomile fall of her hair. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her inside. Caleb understood her shyness. Everyone else in their class thought she was stuck up, that she didn't want to talk to anybody because she thought she was better than them, as if it were possible to be better than the beloved offspring of the tiny town's Southern elite. Her father wasn't even from here. He was from Florida, and Florida wasn't really part of the South anyway. But Caleb knew better. Caleb had a complete grasp of basic geography, and Caleb knew for a fact that Abigail was better than everyone else. In fact, they were practically the same, she and him. Like Caleb, she had to deal with the pressures of high expectations and following on in the family business. The only difference was her family business wasn't making star quarterback or landing in law school. Her family business was making sure very specific trade routes stayed open and killing anyone else who tried to control them. That was something Caleb knew about Abigail that their other friends didn't. Abigail had actually killed someone before. The night Matt and the rest of the guys got together at the bonfire pit, Abigail never showed. Jen called her spineless for not sneaking out, but Abigail's drug-pushing dad was also a single dad. While no one would ever give him the title of Father of the Year, he made it clear to Abigail that he would not let his teenage daughter hang out with unsupervised boys, especially when many of those boys were clients in one way or another. So instead of locking her in her room, he got Abigail more involved. Caleb wasn't sure if popping your murder cherry was better than popping your sex cherry, but he would not argue with a man who told his daughter to take this lovely machete and cut off that bad man's head for trying to sell daddy out to the feds. 3 cuts. She had told him the next day when he finally got her alone and asked, in a less judgmental way than Jen, why she had not come to the party. She said it took 3 cuts to go through the spine and make the head fly. Like swinging a baseball bat, she said, 3 strikes and you're out. What Abigail didn't tell Caleb was that her dad had showed her the proper technique on a tree limb afterward. He said watching her inflict psychological damage on his men with her schoolgirl flailing was hilarious, but she needed to learn how to do it properly, with 1 stroke. He also told her that if she needed to throw up, she should hide behind the dumpsters where no one would see, hear, or smell her. He said it was important that she keep up a brave face in front of her subordinates and not look like a complete idiot. Abigail reached into her pink glitter Chanel bag and pulled out a Smucker's jam jar full of white powder. For the demons, she whispered reverently. Caleb took the jar. He pushed her up against the wall and shoved his tongue in her mouth. She tasted like sour gummies. He felt her lips move under his and her hands gently pushed at his shoulder. Are we going to do this or not? She asked shakily when she got her mouth back. Her eyes glittered with a fierce delight, and it took everything Caleb had not to tear into her jacket, into the soft flesh underneath. Yes, we are. He leaned over again and put a restrained kiss on her forehead. That would have to do until they were alone again after everything was over. In their absence, Jen and Jeff had torn into the pizza. Jeff tossed a beer at Caleb in Caleb's direction, and Jen moved toward the stereo. Can we listen to Bowie? Abigail asked. Jen plugged her MP3 player into the RCA input and coaxed the newest Cradle of Filth album from the stereo speakers. No, she said, Bowie's lame. And high-pitched squealing isn't? Fuck you. Abigail's cheeks flushed an indignant pink. Caleb moved up behind her and squeezed her hand. Danny Filth is an artist, Jen said slowly, enunciating every syllable as if talking to a 3-year-old. You could put on mindless self-indulgence instead, Jeff said with mock seriousness. Juvenile, Jen hissed and cranked the volume. There'll be plenty of time for Bowie later, Caleb whispered underneath the symphonic ululations of the metal band's front man. Abigail looked up into his clear blue eyes and kissed the edge of his lips. He turned his head slightly so that their mouths met again, and over her head, he saw Jen's face cloud over with rage. She glowered at him through her long black lashes. He smiled into Abigail's mouth. Nice circle, Jeff bit into his pizza. You didn't step on it or anything, did you? Caleb asked, pulling away from Abigail. No, Jeff grunted defensively. We know what we're doing, Jen smirked. Do you? Of course I do, Caleb said. When do we get the sacrifice ready? Jeff asked, washing down the pizza with a Pabst Blue Ribbon. Soon, Caleb said, winking at Abigail. Have another beer, Jeff. You have time. Jen and Jeff exchanged secretive glances. Sure thing, Caleb, Jen purred. And what will you ask the great demon lord when we've bent him to our will? The same thing you'll ask for, I suppose, Caleb said. Jen poked her tongue out at him and turned slowly away. Abigail didn't like the way Jen said his name. Abigail didn't like the way Jen looked at him. Sure, she knew they used to date. Everyone in town knew. But even though they weren't dating anymore, Jen still skulked around in Caleb's shadow like a lamprey and had been very successful in scaring off any potential new girlfriends so far. Abigail didn't scare easily. Jen slid across the floor and circled her hips in a way that was supposed to be seductive, but did not match the overzealous guitar shredding. Abigail's fingers itched for something long and sharp. The tooth didn't seem too impressed with Jen either. All right, Caleb said, ignoring Jen. Let's get this show on the road. Jeff turned the music down and crossed to his place outside the circle. Jen flounced to her place across from him, east and west. Caleb took his place at north and gestured for Abigail to stand across from him. Caleb read from his grandfather's diary, all the secrets of the universe in one hand and the jar of cocaine in the other. As he spoke, the words harsh and guttural, the concrete inside the circle dissolved, and a bottomless, lightless pit opened in the space between them. The tooth sank slowly into the darkness and disappeared. It's working, Abigail thought. I can't believe it. It's working. Caleb's voice pitched high as a harsh wind spiraled up from the pit inside the circle, and 1,000 hissing, growling, squealing, shrieking voices rising from the abyss drowned out the death metal music. He opened the jar and dumped it out into the writhing mass of shadows. A multitude of mouths bit and gnashed razor teeth in a frenzy of agony and hunger, desperate need. Jen and Abigail exchanged vicious looks. Jen lunged at Abigail, reaching out with black manicured claws to tangle in Abigail's hair. Abigail expected it and let Jen grab her, stepping in close instead of pulling away. The eager gleam in Jen's slate blue eyes was more telling than her predictable attack. Fucking idiot. Abigail pulled a slender, skeletonized dagger from the hidden sheath strapped to the inside of her forearm, hidden underneath her puffy jacket. Abigail let Caleb's ex-girlfriend push her to the edge of the abyss. She waited until Jen's snotty little face lit up with triumph. Abigail swiped the blade across Jen's throat, slitting open her powder white skin. Jen stumbled back and coughed like a cat hacking up a hairball. She lifted her hand to her neck in a gesture of confused surprise, unsure of what just happened and why Abigail wasn't falling into the nightmare pit. A gurgling sob fell from her mouth as she sank to her knees, blood soaking the black lace dress and the sleeves of her hoodie. Abigail lifted her Gucci sandaled foot and kicked Jen across the intersecting lines of blood and whiskey. Shadowy tentacles wrapped around Jen's arms and legs, snaking around her hips and across her face. Large mouths bit into her side, and claws made wet ribbons of her black hoodie as the thrashing tangle of trapped void creatures dragged her lifeless body down. I think I will stop there and take a look at what y'all are saying into the chat. So sorry, just dropped you in there without any explanation of what I was gonna read at all. That was a little short story about 4 friends who try to play around with magic, and obviously things are not going as well as some of them would hope. So now I can open up to questions. I want to say hi, Christy. Hi, Anita. Hi, Ariel. Let's see, if any of y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to talk about more of the story, or maybe I have time to keep reading. I stopped in the middle on purpose to get to the exciting part. Yeah, sorry, leaving us hanging. I guess I can just go ahead and keep reading. I was trying to read the chat. I apologize. We don't want dead air. Yeah, sure. Okay, Christy asks, I love the magic gone wrong theme. Would you write more of that in short stories? Yes, definitely, because there's, yes, Jen got her comeuppance. I really like seeing the magic gone wrong situation, and people, I always feel like in fantasy, there's that sort of trope where magic users know exactly what they're doing all of the time. And I really want to take that and spin it on its head and say, well, people like no, like when you don't know, like when you're no offense to poor Caleb here, but he's like an idiot little kid who's like playing with something that he found in his in his grandparents' attic, and he doesn't know what it is, and he doesn't know what the consequences are. So that's a good, I really enjoy seeing people getting what they deserve, and just that sort of learning experience, because when I don't really find it fun when people just everything goes your way and life is perfect, because even though it's fantasy, that's not real life. So all right, so it looks like I am going to make an executive decision to read a little bit more. And if y'all have any more questions, I will try to answer them. Excuse me. All right, so Jen has just been dragged down into the abyss for people who need a recap. No eyes, Abigail thought as she watched all those mouths eating, tearing, crying. No eyes to see what they're reaching for. No eyes to know what they're eating. But they wouldn't need eyes, would they? not with their sophisticated palates. Abigail looked across to Caleb. He had dispatched Jeff in similar fashion, but he used his dad's Glock. Caleb rolled Jeff into the pit while he was still alive and screaming with 3 bullet holes in his stomach. If the demons weren't there, that would be a shitty way to die, Abigail grimaced. Caleb really needs to work on his aim. Caleb picked up his grandfather's diary from where it had fallen on the floor and read again. As his mouth formed the words, the blood of the circle glowed with a fierce black fire, and the edges rippled like heat rising off the highway. Abigail thought of shingles peeling off a roof in a storm as the reality inside the circle wavered and stretched. The moaning from within became more frenzied, urgent, eager. Lightning crackled all around the circumference of the circle, and the black fire spat up and arched through the air, engulfing the space above the pit in a shadowy, flickering bubble. Then suddenly, the tentacles receded. The claws pulled back into the deep, and the screaming maelstrom faded from pandemonious cacophony to a soft, almost inaudible wheezing. As the black flames dimmed, as the room became more of a basement again and less of a portal to another dimension, Abigail and Caleb saw hovering in the center of their circle a jellyfish? Abigail stared. A pink and red blob, almost the size of a soccer ball, with fleshy tentacles dripping down, turned in the air, and a solitary pink irised eye swiveled into view on top of the pink dome of its floating body. The jellyfish raised its tentacles, and they rippled in the air almost gracefully for a moment, then splat. The jellyfish hit the floor. A noise like air escaping a balloon squeaked out from the flesh dome, and the once graceful tentacles flopped uselessly on the concrete. The dome shuddered and jiggled like flan as an opening near the bottom expanded and sucked in air. Another deflated balloon noise squeak hissed out from somewhere, and the dome rose about a foot in the air, tentacles twitching, experimenting with splat. The jellyfish fell again. What the? Caleb gasped in disbelief. Is this the great demon lord that's going to make all our dreams? A tentacle struck out and wrapped around Caleb's throat, choking off his words. He thrashed and fought as the fleshy rope tightened around his neck. With a surge of strength, the tentacles sprayed from the void creature's underside and wrapped around Caleb's arms and legs, wrapped around his chest as he fell, struggling to the floor. The jellyfish monster pulled its gelatinous pink body up onto the fallen boy. It latched on and squeezed the life out of him. More tentacles sprouting from nowhere and everywhere at once wrapped around its prey and held fast. Abigail ran at the demon. She stabbed into the rolling pink eye. She stabbed the rubbery, slick dome. She slashed and sawed at the tentacles around Caleb's neck. Nothing worked. The blade bounced off the void creature's flesh as if she were stabbing at it with a feather. The bulbous dome slid on top of Caleb, and its invincible flesh undulated as it hunkered down in the center of his chest. Caleb's face was purple and his eyes were wide and bulging. A tentacle snaked up his neck, across his jaw, and down into his gaping, gasping mouth. He thrashed for a moment, but then the tentacle squeezed tighter. Abigail heard something snap, and his body went rigid. No, 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 Abigail screamed. She threw her useless knife on the floor and wrapped her hands around the jelly dome, trying to pull it off. A soft groan slid past the tentacle in Caleb's mouth, and Abigail felt something warm and wet on her hands where they touched the creature's underside. Gurgling, sucking sounds came from underneath the creature, then a crunch. She didn't realize she was crying until the tentacles released Caleb, and she, still tugging on its slick, rubbery body, fell backward with a splat. The creature landed on top of her. She saw the hole in Caleb's chest, the carnage that was his ribs. Beneath the big pink eye was a mouth like fish hooks rolling around in a blender. Abigail screamed as the tentacles wrapped around her neck and pulled that terrible mouth closer. Mouth touched her cheeks, then dripping mandibles kissed her, and her flesh was painfully reduced to pulpy ribbons. She stopped screaming when her nose and chin were ground down to a soggy red ruin and she lost consciousness. As the void creature finished its meal of girl brains, its dome body swelled. Tentacles lengthened, thickened, and the air jet siphon opened on an underside of the dome behind its mouth. The dome rippled and gurgled wetly as it drew in air, expanding the pink skin. The tentacles released the girl with a monstrous wheeze. It took to the air. If its thoughts could be translated into human words, they would have been up, fly, splat. The void creature expelled the remaining air, its mantle flattening in disappointment. It didn't know why its body wasn't working properly. It didn't, at that point, really understand the concept of body or realize that it had one. What it did know was it was on the ground, and it didn't like it. Ground was a new thing, a new bad thing. The void creature wheezed again as its tentacles hovered across the two bodies and over the ground. It dug into the new thing that was the ground and discovered it could pull itself. It pull wiggled further and further, tentacles reaching around the room and testing the ground as the edges of the walls, the furniture. A tentacle brushed the front of the stereo, and Cradle of Filth filled the silence. The void creature inhaled, filled its air bladder, and launched itself at the stereo. It slammed into the machine with all its strength. The slimy red dome body bounced off the display, and the music stopped momentarily as Jen's MP3 player fell onto the floor, snapping away from the stereo. The CD tray hummed and spun. From the floor, the void creature's pink eye looked up at the humming machine, tentacles coiling as it readied itself for a second attack. It sucked in more air. The gentle strumming of an acoustic guitar and the silvery croon of David Bowie's voice rippled through the room. The blood-spattered monstrosity deflated, soaking up the sound. It rested for a few minutes. Then, as Major Tom floated around his tin can, the void creature puffed itself up and tried, once again, to fly. And that is the end of that story, Demon Tooth. And that is my favorite character. I love creating fantasy worlds with non-human elements and fantasy creatures itself. And that one is particularly dear to my heart. And he does appear in one other short story in my collection, Pulling Teeth, and you find out the fate of this creature and how his story, or its story, as it doesn't have a gender, intersects with my main character, Regina. So I really hope that you all enjoyed that. I'm just going to take a look at the chat here and see. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but lots of great conversation going on. Thank you all so much for tuning in and joining me while I read from my series, The Slaughter Chronicles. I really appreciate you here. I hope that you are enjoying the convention wherever you are in the world. And if you haven't already, check out Artist Alley on the CornCon website. That's where you can find all of the artsy things. And I believe we are just about time. So unless there are any other last minute questions or anything, we can say goodbye, I guess. Thank you so much, Anita. I really appreciate you being here. I loved your panel earlier this morning, afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you so much for showing up, Christy, Ariel. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. Yes, y'all are great. And I'm hoping to, so Pulling Teeth is available now. You can find the link to it on Amazon, on my website, which is jessaforest.com. And right now it's on Kindle Unlimited for well, it's free on KU, but $1.99 to buy. And I am, as you can sort of see by the paperback that my background keeps trying to eat, it will become a paperback very soon. So, you can look for that. I do also have a newsletter that you can sign up for. All the links should be in the bio on the panelist biography page. So you can head over there and check me out there. Again, thank you so much for being here. This is really wonderful. I hope you enjoy the rest of CornCon 2021.